On September 1, 1943, within the operations tent at Rabaul Airfield, New Britain, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, a legendary ace who had sacrificed an eye to American gunners, found himself chuckling. Before him lay a fresh intelligence report detailing a new American fighter. "They call it the Hellcat," he read, a smirk playing on his lips. "Heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport, weighs twice our Zero. Another American failure of design." Through the tent's canvas flaps, Sakai glimpsed his squadron's A6M Zeros, sleek, nimble, and undeniably deadly, lined up on the pierced steel planking. For 2 long years, these magnificent aircraft had reigned supreme across the Pacific skies, effortlessly swatting aside British Hurricanes, American P-40s, and Dutch Brewster Buffaloes. This bloated Hellcat, he firmly believed, would be no different. Yet what Sakai, and indeed none of the Japanese naval aviators preparing for their morning briefing, could possibly know was that in precisely 30 days, this supposed failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F6H Hellcat would go on to achieve an astonishing 19-to-1 kill ratio, destroying a staggering 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would fundamentally transform carrier warfare, decisively break the back of Japanese air power, and brutally expose the fatal assumptions upon which the Zero's reign of terror had been built. The very mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked awkward, flew heavy, and seemed to brazenly violate every principle the Japanese had so meticulously perfected. Within a mere 6 months, the pilots, now laughing at intelligence reports, would be penning final, somber letters home, having tragically understood that an encounter with Hellcats meant a statistical certainty of death. The Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 wasn't mere arrogance. It was by all appearances built on solid, irrefutable mathematics. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that bordered on the unbelievable. A mere 29 losses at Pearl Harbor against 347 destroyed. 7 losses in the Philippines versus 103. 2 losses over Darwin compared to 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm had been utterly annihilated, and the Dutch East Indies Air Force eliminated in a matter of days. At the pulsating heart of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, an aircraft that had dared to rewrite the very rules of fighter design. When captured examples were tested by American engineers in 1942, they initially refused to believe the reported performance figures. A fighter boasting the range of a bomber, the breathtaking maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to obliterate anything it caught, it seemed utterly impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who had tragically become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary. "Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters like they build cars, heavy, overbuilt, wasteful." The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through a truly revolutionary design philosophy. Extra super duralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, crafted a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks added a single ounce of weight. Even the radio was often ruthlessly removed to save a mere 30 pounds. Every precious ounce was meticulously sacrificed for performance. The first whispers of the F6H Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed less like engineering data and more like blatant misinformation, or perhaps deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed a colossal 12,186 pounds loaded. The Zero, by stark contrast, tipped the scales at a lean 5,800 pounds. Its wing area spanned a generous 334 square feet, powered by a seemingly draggy radial engine. It bristled with 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate judiciously placed everywhere, bulletproof glass protecting the pilot, and self-sealing tanks capable of holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had orchestrated Pearl Harbor, reviewed these specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, meticulously preserved in the Japanese Defense Archives, was utterly dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with sheer weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics, at first glance, seemed to bolster his assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot granted it an astonishingly tight turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius exceeding 900 feet. In a turning fight, the very cornerstone of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be utterly helpless. On September 30th, 1943, over the remote expanse of Marcus Island, Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them, 6 ominous dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His immediate thought, recorded in his after-action report, was B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they banked, and he instantly recognized the distinctive silhouette. Single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed almost too short for the body. First encounter with F6F type fighter, he would write. Initial impression: Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber, engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant utilizing the Zero's unparalleled turn rate to effortlessly get on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, fully expecting the ponderous American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to gracefully curve onto its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something utterly unprecedented unfolded. The Hellcat didn't flee. It didn't attempt to match his turn. It surged vertically. The mighty Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, roaring with 2,000 horsepower, a full 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai's 1,130 horsepower, propelled the Hellcat upward at an astonishing 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, desperately attempting to follow, watched his airspeed rapidly decay as the Zero struggled valiantly against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat executed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for an aircraft of its weight, a breathtaking hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported, his words still carrying the shock of the moment. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The sheer volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 terrifying seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I miraculously escape. Fukui survived, barely limping back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masaw, never returned. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat. On October 5, 1943, Task Force 14 descended upon Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. American carriers had been launching these irritating hit-and-run attacks for months, usually fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time, however, would be profoundly different. We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his diary. Below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every conceivable advantage: altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed utterly shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained their formation with unwavering discipline, accelerating in a gentle dive that meticulously preserved their energy. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, desperately hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment.
The Hellcats' formidable armor included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds shielding the vital oil system, and self-sealing tanks that could withstand dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in their desperate diving passes, the Hellcats unleashed their devastating counterattack. Instead of turning into a chaotic dogfight, they ingeniously used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they soared to altitudes where the Zero's engine choked, struggling for precious oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing a robust 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was down to a paltry 900. "They came down on us like hawks on sparrows," Shiga wrote, the horror still palpable in his words. "Their weight gave them a speed we couldn't possibly match. They would dive, unleash those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could even react." 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. On November 11, 1943, at Rabaul, the assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened in grim silence as Lieutenant Commander Teo Tanimizu briefed them on the new, brutal American tactics. Tanimizu, a veteran with 32 victories, was one of the precious few pilots who had survived multiple, terrifying encounters with Hellcats. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanimizu meticulously explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Employing a revolutionary combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots relentlessly maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy into kinetic energy in slashing, high-speed attacks that offered Zero pilots no chance to exploit their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Tanimizu continued, "one high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, allow them to coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine." In December 1943, at Truck Lagoon, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, now served as Air Operations Officer for the combined fleet. His inspection of damaged Zeros, limping back from their brutal encounters with Hellcats, starkly revealed the rapidly growing technology gap. The disparity in firepower was a cold, hard mathematical reality. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired an astounding 750 rounds per minute each, a terrifying 4,500 rounds per minute total. Each .5 caliber bullet weighed 46 grams and hurtled through the air at 2,900 feet per second, delivering a crushing 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. The Zero's 7.7mm machine guns fired projectiles weighing a mere 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, delivering a paltry 750 foot-pounds of energy. Even more disturbing were the relentless reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied on eyesight to spot enemies, Hellcat pilots were precisely guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could detect Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Kumachi vividly described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." By January 1944, the Japanese pilot crisis had escalated to catastrophic levels. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program had arguably been the world's most demanding. Training typically took 3 grueling years, with pilots entering combat boasting an impressive 700 flight hours. Army pilots received a minimum of 500 hours. They were true artists of aerial combat, meticulously trained in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of air fighting. By early 1944, however, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with a meager 300 hours of flight time, Army pilots with an alarming 200. Crippling fuel shortages meant most training was conducted in gliders. Gunnery practice was severely limited to just 50 rounds per pilot.
Formation flying, instrument flight, and even basic radio procedures were all ruthlessly eliminated to rush desperately needed pilots to the front lines. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with a minimum of 300 hours, including 50 hours in type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, meticulously practiced carrier landings until they were second nature, and honed their energy tactics in the safety of Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasomigara Naval Air Station, wrote in his final, heart-wrenching report, "We are sending children to fight professionals." Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. We have no ammunition for practice. He had never flown at night. We have no fuel for such training. He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. The Battle of Formosa, from October 12 to 16, 1944, saw Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukuome, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, committing every available resource to halt the relentless American carrier raids. Over 700 aircraft, including the last trained pilots from the Homeland training squadrons, were hurled into the brutal fray. The Japanese initially claimed a spectacular victory. 26 carriers and battleships sunk, 300 aircraft destroyed. The grim reality, however, discovered only after pilots returned and gun camera footage was developed, was catastrophic. Actual American losses? A mere 89 aircraft. Japanese losses, a staggering 329 aircraft, and almost every remaining experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the precious few surviving veterans, described the slaughter in his memoirs. The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below. They had divided the sky into grids, each section covered by a division. It was not combat, it was systematic extermination. On June 19, 1944, in the Philippine Sea, the Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago, the decisive battle intended to utterly destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, and their best remaining pilots faced Task Force 58, a colossal force boasting 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, a daunting 450 of them F6F Hellcats. Admiral Saburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, brimming with confidence that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would ultimately prevail. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 0830. American radar detected them from an astonishing 150 miles away. Hellcats were vectored for interception with perfect positioning, altitude advantage, the sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, spotted the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted a brutal 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft that single unforgettable day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing,
claimed 6 more. The Zeros tried to turn with us. We simply refused. We'd make a high-side run, shoot one down, zoom climb back to altitude. They'd try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off. By day's end, the Japanese had suffered a devastating loss of 346 carrier aircraft, plus an additional 50 land-based aircraft. American losses? A mere 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined a chilling, unforgettable term: Turkey Shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf, on October 24, 1944, Commander David McCampbell would set his single mission record. Leading 7 Hellcats from the USS Essex, he intercepted a formidable force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading directly for the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute aerial ballet of death, McCampbell shot down an astonishing 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. "I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill," McCampbell recorded.
The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout. Not a single hit on my aircraft, despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement starkly demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had utterly routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without a single loss. McCampbell's 2 incredible ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The brutal aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles spawned what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among the few surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, wrote with chilling clarity, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible: the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots, no matter how skilled, were engaging not planes, but a system." The pilot shortage became so acutely dire that by early 1945, training was tragically reduced to a mere 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots and 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, approximately 7 days of hurried training. Operation Iceberg, the protracted and bloody invasion of Okinawa from April to June 1945, saw the Japanese unleash an astonishing 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet. The Hellcat transformed from merely a fighter into an essential defender against the sheer desperation of these suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his famed Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations, employing divisions of 4 aircraft in perfectly coordinated attacks, rendered traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. "We developed what we called the mowing machine," Valencia explained. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. We'd make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark and unforgiving. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming an incredible 2,351 victories against a mere 249 losses, a devastating 9.5 to 1 ratio. More significantly, they relentlessly prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. By 1945, the technological chasm had become utterly unbridgeable. The F6F Hellcat incorporated continuous improvements that made it even deadlier. Water injection boosting power to a formidable 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, enhanced armor, and the revolutionary K-14 computing gun sight that automatically calculated deflection.
Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace, with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15, encountered Hellcats for the very first time in June 1944. Despite his unparalleled skill and vast experience, he was nearly killed in his initial engagement. He wrote in his autobiography, "I performed my best aerobatics, loops, rolls, split S's, every maneuver I had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat." By the war's conclusion, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed an astounding 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, lost a mere 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieved an incredible 19.3-to-1 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, and accounted for an overwhelming 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was truly catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. The tragic transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite fighting force to desperate kamikaze operations represented the ultimate painful admission of Hellcat superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan tragically turned its pilots into guided missiles.
Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the grim father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark, brutal mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, the probability of success is near zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, the probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats, in the process. The very next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa met his end as a passenger aboard a transport tragically shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, utterly helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had so briefly bested. On August 15, 1945, as Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast filled the air, Captain Minoru Genda, the same man who had once dismissed the Hellcat as merely weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words at Atsugi Airfield. Around him sat the shattered remnants of Japanese naval aviation, teenagers with a paltry 40 hours of flight time, aircraft cobbled together from desperate spare parts, fuel tanks ominously empty. That very same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 2 p.m., marking the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short, decisive bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns brought the Pacific Air War to a definitive close. In September 1945, at Atsugi Airfield, the first American aircraft to land after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway in solemn awe, eager to finally see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vasu, an ace with 19 victories, proceeded to demonstrate the Hellcat's capabilities to the humbled Japanese pilots. His casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart, left them utterly speechless. "You have to understand," Vasu told them through an interpreter, a note of quiet pride in his voice. "This isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 Gs. I've never managed to break one. Japanese engineers meticulously studying captured Hellcats after the war unveiled the true extent of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine contained an astonishing 2,840 precision-machined parts, each flawlessly interchangeable with any other R2800 engine. The Nakajima Sakai, by stark contrast, required laborious hand-fitting of components. No two engines were ever exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the brilliant designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was devastatingly simple. We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age. Grumman's relentless production of the Hellcat itself became a weapon of unparalleled strategic significance. The Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a ceaseless hum of industry. At peak production, a gleaming new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every astonishing 60 minutes. The company produced an incredible 12,275 Hellcats in a mere 30 months, a manufacturing feat the Japanese simply couldn't comprehend. In 1944 alone, Japan produced a total of 5,100 fighters of all types. America, in that same year, produced an astonishing 35,000 fighters. The production system incorporated innovations that seemed utterly impossible to Japanese observers. Workers utilizing color-coded instructions to efficiently assemble complex components, shifts operating around the clock, and a relentless commitment to quality maintained despite the breakneck speed.
The Hellcat didn't merely win battles, it fundamentally revolutionized naval warfare. Pre-war doctrine had grimly assumed that carriers were vulnerable platforms that needed to strike first to merely survive. The Hellcat inverted this dangerous assumption. Carriers transformed into impregnable fortresses that could absorb and repel any air attack with impunity. Admiral Mark Mitcher, the astute commander of Task Force 58, profoundly understood this transformation. With the Hellcat, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience. This newfound confidence empowered unprecedented offensive operations. American carriers could boldly station themselves off enemy coastlines for weeks on end, their Hellcat umbrellas rendering them essentially invulnerable to air attack. Beyond its cutting-edge technology, the Hellcat powerfully represented a cultural philosophy that ultimately invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The revered samurai tradition emphasized individual excellence, spiritual strength, and the honorable acceptance of death. The Hellcat, conversely, embodied systematic efficiency, overwhelming material superiority, and the paramount preservation of life. This profound philosophical gulf meant that Japanese pilots, even when they intellectually grasped Hellcat tactics, simply couldn't adapt to them. The core concept of strategically refusing combat when disadvantaged, a fundamental tenet of Hellcat doctrine, was literally unthinkable to Japanese pilots rigorously trained in Bushido. In 1962, the United States Navy hosted a poignant symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered, sharing perspectives and discussing the conflict with historical clarity. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's revered ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply and unequivocally, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable." Commander Saburo Sakai responded with a profound, almost tragic insight. The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until it was too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost.
The Hellcat's unparalleled dominance can be distilled into simple, brutal mathematics that narrate a profound story. A kill ratio of 19-1 overall, and a staggering 13-1 specifically against Zeros. 12,275 Hellcats were produced in just 30 months, compared to approximately 6,000 Zeros produced from 1943 to 1945. Over 5,000 American pilots were meticulously trained on Hellcats, versus fewer than 100 combat-capable Japanese pilots remaining by August 1945. Admiral Saburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at the Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest and heart-wrenching assessment. We laughed at the Hellcat because we didn't understand it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to war. By the time we stopped laughing, our air forces had ceased to exist. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai lived until the year 2000. In his final interview, when asked about the Hellcat, his response perfectly captured the totality of its dominance. The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed, carrying armor the Zero didn't have, powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build, armed with weapons they couldn't match, guided by radars they couldn't detect, flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training, and produced in numbers they couldn't possibly comprehend. Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness, but the immense strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had transmuted into last letters home, their mockery into desperate kamikaze missions, their confidence into complete and utter collapse. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zeros, it had utterly destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare, proving, with brutal finality, that in modern combat, the nation that could build the better system would relentlessly destroy the nation that could only build better warriors. The Japanese pilots had laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did.